Brandon.
Hey guys, yesterday Ammo Land put out a bit of an update on the Hunter Biden scandal, if you want to call it that, in terms of his being a crackhead, filling out a 4473, and then essentially his wife, or his girlfriend I should say, the ex-wife of his dead brother, ditching his firearm because she feared for her safety and her children's safety from Hunter Biden. That story is kind of resurfaced a little bit, and the reason why it's resurfaced is because an official FOIA request was put out. Now, that FOIA request was denied, and I want to explain to you some of that process. First of all, I want to say I'm no attorney, but I can read, so there's some things in here that are pretty obvious that I'd like to point out as far as the rules for thee and not for me type scenarios that we're used to dealing with. The first thing I want to do is explain what a Glomar response is, and I may even be pronouncing that wrong, but it's Glomar. Glomar is the way I assume that it's intended to be pronounced. This is a response where if you make an official FOIA request and the government feels like that information doesn't need to get out and they don't really want to acknowledge whether or not whatever you're asking for exists or doesn't exist, their response is with a Glomar response. And that's pretty much a can't confirm or deny type of response. Just to give you a general example of what that could be, it might be if a FOIA request is made by a local newspaper that wants to see the floor plan of the safe room for the President of the United States. Well, of course, they're not going to provide that. Now, at the same time, they may not want to acknowledge that it exists either, so they can have a Glomar response. So that's what you would get. That's what it's used for. Well, the ATF and their attorneys have used it, or Department of Justice, I should say, which is over the ATF, have used a Glomar response in this particular case. Now, the plaintiff, David Codrea, they're saying made the FOIA request based on an incident related to an alleged incident involving a handgun disappearing from a car belonging to Robert Hunter Biden. Now, I've not seen the FOIA request, but what this document is referring to, it's stating that there was some discussion about Mr. Biden's alleged acknowledgement of a state police investigation being not the same as his acknowledging an ATF investigation. In other words, this request was referring to the fact that these laptops, they call them laptops from hell from Hunter Biden, that essentially he abandoned them. So by abandoning them, he was giving up his right to privacy, but he was saying that if they're not important enough for me, that the information on there is not important enough for me to protect. The FOIA request is referring to the fact that all this information was on there, and Hunter Biden referred to in a series of texts that the Secret Service and other folks were involved in recovering the firearm that his girlfriend had ditched of his in the trash can in front of a supermarket. So they're referring to that in this particular FOIA request, and that's where the ATF is starting to have its problem. They're essentially finding technicalities on why to not grant this FOIA request, and really it's based on protecting Hunter Biden's privacy. In spite of the laptop and all the information on it, that has been confirmed, by the way, by the likes of the New York Times and very left-leaning newspapers, so it's definitely true. They state that the plaintiff has failed to raise any plausible inference, much less actual evidence of such government misconduct, because what the FOIA request is trying to show is that the ATF did not prosecute Hunter Biden for misgivings or misconduct in terms of how this gun was actually done away with. It goes on to state that the revelation of any such investigation would constitute an unwarranted invasion of Mr. Biden's privacy because his substantial interest in not having any such investigation disclosed outweighs any public interest in such disclosure. So essentially they're taking Hunter Biden's side. They're saying that Hunter Biden doesn't want anybody else to know, so that outweighs any of our interest in this particular topic. Goes on to state that the plaintiff must proffer compelling evidence of misconduct, meaning that the plaintiff, in this case, Mr. Codrea, has got to provide enough evidence showing that there was misconduct on the ATF's part. So the ATF is saying that you have not proven with all of this, even though the laptop from hell has been proven to be true, you've not proven that we've done anything wrong by not prosecuting Hunter Biden for the way all of this went down. This was kind of funny where it says documents about ATF's position as to whether substance abusers are prohibited from possessing firearms or about why it decides not to prosecute members of high-ranking families if they existed. In other words, they're saying this policy may or may not exist, just like the Glomar response would be outside the scope of the plaintiff's request. Now, they're saying that we're not providing this information because this isn't specifically what the request, the FOIA request, was about. Again, they're leaning on technicalities here. It says an interpretation of the FOIA request that encompassed documents not directly related to the alleged incident would not only be inconsistent with the face of the request, but also would be unworkable in terms of crafting a search for responsive records. So they're saying that the FOIA request is about the gun being left in a trash can. And they're also saying that, okay, you're saying that the ATF committed misconduct by not doing something, prosecuting or whatever, Hunter Biden about lying on his 4473 when he purchased that firearm because he didn't say that he was an abuser of illegal drugs, which he was supposed to. So he lied on the form. And the ATF actually acknowledges throughout this document, or in a couple of places rather, that Hunter Biden has admitted to substance abuse. So the ATF is not even denying that they know Hunter has a substance abuse problem. And they acknowledge that he filled out a 4473. They acknowledge that he said no, that he was not abusing it. But they're not going to do anything about it. Even though they acknowledge all of those things that are illegal. Because the FOIA request was centered around the pistol being dumped in the trash can, they're not going to do anything about the lying on the 4473 because, again, that's not what the FOIA request was centered around. It goes on to say that the plaintiff fails to meet the threshold required to show a substantial public interest in disclosure. The requester must produce evidence that would warrant a belief by a reasonable person that the alleged government impropriety might have occurred. They're using the word alleged in here when it's all proven to be facts. None of what we're talking about, they may not have had a trial on this, but nothing is even up for debate. There's nothing is even being questioned, and they're still throwing the word alleged around in there. Now, this was interesting because the plaintiff, Mr. Cordrea, apparently pointed to a particular instance where a person was prosecuted for abusing drugs and purchasing and owning a firearm. They say that by pointing to one instance in which ATF recommended for prosecution an individual who admitted to substance abuse and firearm ownership, but the fact that ATF recommended one individual for prosecution is not, of course, evidence that the ATF would have committed misconduct by failing to recommend a prosecution in the circumstances plaintiff alleges. So the ATF is saying that just because we prosecuted another person under the exact same circumstances doesn't mean that we've done anything wrong by not prosecuting Hunter Biden for the exact same thing. Moreover, ATF employees are not responsible for prosecution decisions. They can only refer an investigation to a U.S. Attorney's Office, which then has discretion over whether to bring a prosecution. Well, then do it. Do it. I mean, we know why you're not, but if that's your reason for not prosecuting Hunter Biden because you don't have prosecutorial, jurisdiction, then give it to the people who do. The ATF argued in its opening brief that there are many reasons why a prosecutor might decline to prosecute a case that do not amount to government misconduct. We know there are many reasons. We know that you probably don't want to state what that reason is. Now, is it misconduct? Yeah, it is. But it's shady and it happens all the time in Washington, D.C. So by your definition of misconduct, yeah, of course, there are definitely many reasons why a lot of stuff gets swept under the carpet. But that's the whole point of the FOIA request, to reveal all that and bring it to light. So it looks like this FOIA request is just going to get thrown away, kicked in the dust. Maybe Cordrea will come up with a follow-up one based on these specific things that they're saying that, oh, we can't talk about or prosecute or even suggest prosecution of the crackhead applying, the admitted crackhead applying for a firearm through the 4473 and then buying it and purchasing it even though he lied on a federal form. Since we can't talk about that because your FOIA request was simply about the issue with the pistol getting thrown in the trash, maybe Cardria puts together a different FOIA request aligning itself with those specifics about the crackhead part of it. Because then, the ATF acknowledges throughout here that Hunter has even admitted of his substance abuse. Now, the thing that I found really, really interesting, just because I was curious, I'm no crack journalist or anything like that, the principal deputy assistant attorney responsible for this, because I noticed the wording throughout this whole thing was real pointed. Like, it wasn't even polite. It was basically a slap in the face saying that the plaintiff showed no merit. It was really, really like they were agitated that they even had to go through the motions of this. So I kind of wondered who are the ones that are doing this. So I did a quick search, actually a pretty thorough search, on Brian M. Boynton, again, the principal deputy assistant attorney. And what I found was pretty interesting. I went to a website about public financial disclosure and was able to find Mr. Boynton. And as I scrolled down the pages to look at various things, it lists things like what type of income he has, how he makes his income, why he's making his income, the different streams of revenue that he might be involved in, what he's worth, that kind of thing. Well, it goes down and you'll notice that at the very, very bottom of this portion over here, you will see at number 24, DNC Services Corp. DNC Services Corp. You know what that is, right? The Democratic National Committee. The man is an attorney for the DNC. So why else do you think that things like this get swept under the rug? We all know it's dirty. We all know it's filthy. We all know it's corrupt. That's why we want to drain that swamp. But it's stuff like this. You've got the fox guarding the hen house. This is an attorney who is not acting on behalf of the American people. Now, he's employed by the American people with taxpayer dollars from the American people. But all he's essentially doing with our taxpayer money is defending this government and defending the son, a private citizen, defending the son of the President of the United States with federal money. He is a private attorney and an attorney for the federal government, and he's using his time to fight off people who are looking for information to right wrongs out there that have been done incorrectly. And again, he's doing it on taxpayer time, doing it with taxpayer money, and at the same time, he's funneling money from the DNC and no telling who else. I saw Moderna on there also. No telling who else that he's doing the dirty work for, and we're the ones that are funding this whole project.
Let's go, Brandon.